Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age where the self is often exalted beyond reason, and the line between confidence and pathology becomes dangerously blurred. It is one thing to value oneself, to understand one's worth and protect one's dignity. It is another thing entirely to become consumed by a grandiose image, divorced from humility, responsibility, or genuine connection with others. That is the territory of the narcissist. The most dangerous predators are not those who roar the loudest, but those who smile the most convincingly. The charismatic manipulator is perhaps the most disarming of all narcissist types because their charm doesn't just conceal their intentions, it justifies them. They do not seek attention through chaos, but through admiration. And the admiration they crave is not superficial, it's strategic. They understand that charm is power, and they wield it like a weapon. These individuals often rise quickly in social, professional, or even romantic settings. They speak well, often eloquently, projecting warmth, humor, and confidence. They are dressed, well-mannered, and attentive. On the surface, they appear to be ideal leaders, friends, or partners. But underneath that polish lies something deeply manipulative. They don't connect. They control. Their charm is not a reflection of authentic interest in others. It's a mechanism to dominate the environment, one conversation at a time. The charismatic manipulator thrives on perception. They curate an image of reliability and compassion, making them highly persuasive. People trust them too easily. This trust becomes the foundation upon which they build influence. But influence in their hands does not serve a greater good. It serves their ego. The moment someone challenges them, or sees through the mask, they react with calculated coldness or subtle cruelty. They may discredit, isolate, or gaslight the dissenting voice, all while maintaining the appearance of virtue. What makes them especially dangerous is the cognitive dissonance they create in others, because they appear so generous, so competent, so good. Their victims often question their own perceptions. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm overreacting. This internal confusion gives the manipulator even more power. Their victims become hesitant, passive, even dependent. The manipulator exploits this dynamic, often crafting situations in which others feel indebted to them, bound by loyalty, or guilty for setting boundaries. Their relationships are not relationships in the traditional sense. They are psychological stage plays. The charismatic manipulator casts themselves as the hero, the savior, or the misunderstood genius. Everyone else is an actor assigned a role that supports the central narrative. When someone deviates from that role, when they grow independent, assertive, or self-aware, they are either discarded or villainized. Another hallmark of this narcissist is selective empathy. They can appear deeply compassionate when it suits them. They'll remember your birthday, listen to your problems, or offer advice. But it's not because they care, it's because emotional investment becomes leverage. They are masters of reciprocity, but in reverse. They give just enough to make others feel obligated to give back. Loyalty, silence, compliance. What's worse is that many charismatic manipulators believe their own narrative. They don't see themselves as controlling or narcissistic. They see themselves as leaders, as visionaries, as people who simply get things done. They rationalize their manipulation as strategy, their dishonesty as diplomacy, and their lack of empathy as efficiency. They are often surrounded by enablers, people who are taken in by the mask and reinforce the illusion. So how do you protect yourself? Pay attention not just to words, but to patterns. Observe how they treat others, especially those who offer nothing in return. Watch for moments when they subtly undermine others to elevate themselves. Trust your discomfort. Charm can be rehearsed. Empathy cannot, and power, when misused, is almost always wrapped in persuasion. In the end, the charismatic manipulator is a reminder that evil does not always come with a snarl. Sometimes it comes with a smile and a perfectly rehearsed script. At first glance, the victim narcissist appears to be anything but dangerous. They seem fragile, overwhelmed, misunderstood, people who have been dealt an unfair hand by life. They speak in the language of pain, of injustice, of trauma. But behind that appearance of helplessness lies a deeply manipulative structure of entitlement, blame, and control. They don't just seek sympathy, they demand it. They don't just suffer, they capitalize on their suffering. This type of narcissist has learned to weaponize victimhood. They use their past experiences, real or exaggerated, as leverage in social dynamics. Their wounds become their identity, and their identity becomes a justification for entitlement. They are not seeking healing, they are seeking validation at all costs. And if you deny them that validation, you become part of the problem in their narrative. You are cold, heartless, even abusive, simply for not playing your part in their emotional theater. One of the most disorienting aspects of the victim narcissist is their ability to invert the roles in any situation. If they hurt you, it was because they were hurting. If they manipulated you, it was because they were afraid. If they betrayed you, it was because they didn't feel appreciated. In every scenario, they are the injured party, even when the evidence says otherwise. They constantly reframe the past to preserve their status as the wounded hero or heroine, misunderstood by a cruel world. This narcissist thrives in relationships that are based on guilt and pity. They create emotional environments where others feel responsible for their happiness, their safety, even their mental stability. If you try to set boundaries, they accuse you of abandonment. If you assert yourself, they collapse into emotional distress. Their fragility becomes a form of emotional blackmail, binding you into a role of perpetual rescuer. The victim narcissist is also remarkably skilled at turning others against each other. They recount events in ways that make themselves seem innocent while painting others as cruel or selfish. They exploit empathy in social circles, gaining allies who see them as someone who has been endlessly wronged. This allows them to sidestep accountability, as any criticism directed toward them is reframed as another attack on someone who's already been hurt enough. What makes this type particularly difficult to confront is that their story is often partially true. They may have experienced trauma, loss, or mistreatment, but the danger lies in how they use that history, not to grow, but to dominate. Their past becomes a shield that deflects responsibility and a sword that cuts through the boundaries of others. They hide behind suffering while wielding control, leaving those around them confused, drained, and emotionally entangled. Their relationships tend to become one-sided. Everything revolves around their needs, their moods, their insecurities. There is little room for mutuality. They may expect constant reassurance, support, and affirmation, but offer very little in return. And over time, those who care for them often find themselves emotionally depleted, walking on eggshells, afraid to trigger yet another wave of drama. The greatest danger with the victim narcissist is that they make virtue out of helplessness. They frame their dysfunction as authenticity, their dependency as loyalty, their manipulation as vulnerability. And if you ever dare to step back and protect your own mental space, they will accuse you of being just like everyone else who abandoned them. So what is the antidote? It is clarity. It is the ability to discern between genuine suffering and emotional manipulation. It is understanding that compassion without boundaries is not kindness. It is self-sacrifice. To help someone is noble. To be used by them is not. The moment you feel guilty for taking care of yourself in their presence, you may be dealing with more than a victim. You may be dealing with a narcissist in disguise. When most people think of narcissism, they picture someone loud, boastful, and demanding of attention. But the covert narcissist is the opposite. Quiet, modest, and even self-effacing on the surface. They seem like the last person you'd suspect of grandiosity. And yet, beneath that unassuming exterior lies a deeply entitled and manipulative individual. They do not shout their superiority, they whisper it. They do not demand admiration, they expect it, silently and perpetually. This type is defined by contradiction. Outwardly, they may appear anxious, introverted, or shy. They express their thoughts in vague, sometimes melancholic ways, often painting themselves as sensitive or misunderstood. But don't be fooled by the humility. It is not real humility. It is a mask designed to attract sympathy and to conceal an internal sense of specialness that burns just as intensely as that of their overt counterparts. At the core of the covert narcissist is a profound belief that they are inherently more complex, more insightful, more deserving than others. But because they believe the world has failed to recognize their worth, they live in a state of chronic resentment. Every compliment given to someone else feels like a personal slight. Every success that is not theirs becomes a reminder of the injustice of the world. The covert narcissist often adopts a victim narrative, but unlike the victim narcissist, they do so with subtlety. They won't cry out for help or make a dramatic scene. Instead, they'll drop hints about being overlooked, misunderstood, or emotionally neglected. Their pain is implied rather than declared. They want others to notice their suffering, to recognize their depth, without ever asking directly for validation. This creates an emotional riddle for those around them. Figure me out. Prove that you care enough to see me. In relationships, the covert narcissist creates a quiet dependency. They may seem highly sensitive, emotionally fragile, and even empathetic, but over time, their partners often begin to feel drained, responsible, and confused. Passive-aggressive behavior becomes the norm. Guilt, tripping, silent treatments, subtle jabs disguised as jokes. The covert narcissist rarely confronts directly. Instead, they use indirect tactics to control and punish. Professionally, these individuals often sabotage themselves while blaming others. They may avoid promotions due to anxiety, then resent their coworkers who advance. They may speak bitterly about how the system rewards the loud and shallow, while they, the deep thinker, the true artist, the moral one, remain unrecognized. Their sense of superiority is not abandoned. It is buried under layers of self, pity, and indirect bitterness. Their greatest fear is being ordinary, and yet, because they refuse to risk failure or rejection, they rarely take the bold steps needed for genuine growth. Instead, they retreat into a world of imagined superiority, where their lack of success is never their fault, and their emotional suffering is always more real than anyone else's. What makes the covert narcissist especially dangerous is their ability to turn perception upside down. They may appear like the victim while subtly undermining others. They may seem caring while constantly manipulating emotional responses. They don't inspire fear like a malignant narcissist. They inspire confusion and self-doubt. Their emotional games are slow, invisible, and corrosive. So how does one recognize them? Pay attention to contradictions. Look for the person who constantly feels slighted despite receiving support. Notice the one who always feels alone, even in close relationships. Be wary of those who seem to pull others in with vulnerability, but then drain them with unending emotional needs and subtle blame. In the end, covert narcissism is no less destructive than its overt form. It's simply more difficult to detect. But its impact on relationships, teams, and mental health can be just as profound. And once you understand the silent strategies they use, you can begin to protect yourself, not with aggression, but with awareness, boundaries, and truth. Among the spectrum of narcissistic personalities, the malignant narcissist stands out as the most destructive. This is not merely someone who is vain or self-absorbed. This is a person who combines narcissistic grandiosity with traits of aggression, paranoia, manipulation, and in some cases, even sadism. Unlike other narcissists who seek admiration or emotional validation, the malignant type seeks dominance. Their motivation isn't just to be liked or respected. It is to control, subjugate, and often to destroy. Malignant narcissism is not just a personality style. It is a psychological force that reshapes relationships, institutions, and entire families through fear and submission. These individuals are not content with being seen as special. They want others to feel inferior, and they do not just desire control. They demand obedience. What makes them uniquely dangerous is the combination of three qualities: narcissistic entitlement, ruthless aggression, and a total absence of empathy. Most narcissists manipulate through charm or emotional dependency. The malignant type uses intimidation, coercion, and emotional brutality. They do not mask their need for power, they flaunt it. And when opposed, they do not reflect. They retaliate. These individuals often present themselves as strong, decisive, and authoritative. They are confident to the point of megalomania. In conversations, they dominate. In relationships, they control. In groups, they maneuver themselves to the top or destroy those who prevent it. They believe they are superior, not just morally or intellectually, but existentially. To them, others are tools, threats, or background noise. But the facade they present is often very different from what they are behind closed doors. In public, they may appear successful, persuasive, even charming. But in private, they are tyrannical, explosive, and punitive. Their need to maintain dominance creates a climate of fear around them. Partners, children, employees, anyone close learn to walk on eggshells, to anticipate mood swings, to censor themselves to avoid triggering rage. They are also deeply paranoid. They assume that others are envious, deceitful, or scheming, because that is how they operate themselves. This internal world of suspicion justifies their hostility. They are quick to perceive betrayal and quicker to retaliate. Apologies mean nothing to them. Remorse is weakness. Mercy is betrayal. Once someone is categorized as the enemy, and no level of cruelty is off limits. The malignant narcissist is often associated with abusive relationships, emotional, psychological, and sometimes physical. They degrade their victims gradually, using tactics like gaslighting, humiliation, and isolation. Over time, they erode the self-worth of others, leaving them dependent, fearful, and confused. And yet, they blame others for the damage they cause. In their mind, the victim is always at fault, for being weak, for being disloyal, for not understanding their greatness. What makes them even more insidious is their ability to justify their cruelty. They believe their actions are deserved, even righteous. If people would just listen to me, everything would be fine. They brought it on themselves. They view compassion as manipulation and vulnerability as a target. The moral compass is not just broken, it's weaponized. So how can one deal with a malignant narcissist? First, by recognizing the signs early. Do not be deceived by initial confidence or assertiveness. Look for patterns of dehumanization, lack of remorse, and escalating control. If you find yourself constantly explaining your actions, questioning your worth, or fearing emotional explosions, take it seriously. Second, understand that change is extremely rare in these individuals. Traditional empathy-based interventions don't work because empathy is precisely what they lack. Boundaries, distance, and in some cases, complete disengagement are necessary for protection. Ultimately, the malignant narcissist is not someone to be reformed, but someone to be escaped. Their power lies not in their strength, but in others' silence. The antidote is truth, clarity, and the courage to walk away from the shadow they cast. In the hierarchy of narcissistic personalities, the intellectual narcissist is perhaps the most subtly intimidating. They do not manipulate with charm or emotional pleas. They dominate with logic, vocabulary, and the carefully curated aura of superior intelligence. Their mind is their weapon, and their battlefield is conversation, debate, and opinion. On the surface, they may appear rational and articulate, but beneath that calm exterior lies a hunger not for truth, but for dominance masked as enlightenment. This type of narcissist sees knowledge not as a tool for understanding, but as a mechanism for control. They treat ideas the way a tyrant treats laws, bending them as needed to assert power. They are often read, articulate, and intellectually competent, but their brilliance is selectively applied. They listen only to argue, not to understand. They ask questions not out of curiosity, but to expose ignorance in others. Their aim is not dialogue, but submission. In a conversation, the intellectual narcissist does not seek common ground. They seek to win, and the way they win is by making others feel small, unprepared, or unintelligent. You might walk away from a discussion with them feeling confused, uncertain, or even ashamed, not because your ideas were wrong, but because you were systematically dismantled for daring to have them. They often interrupt, correct, and condescend. And if you challenge them, they become cold, dismissive, or passive, aggressive. What makes this type especially insidious is that they often appear composed and reasonable. They do not shout or insult directly. Instead, they disguise their superiority complex in intellectualism. They'll use obscure references, complex language, and logical traps to maintain a position of authority. Their intelligence is not shared generously. It is weaponized to create dependence or silence opposition. In relationships, the intellectual narcissist assumes the role of the teacher, the mentor, or the expert. They position their partner or friends as students who should be grateful to receive their insights. Any disagreement is interpreted as ignorance or disrespect. Emotional needs are trivialized because feelings aren't facts. In this way, they invalidate others not through overt cruelty, but through intellectual minimization. They often dismiss intuition, creativity, or spiritual insight as irrational or naive. They live in a rigid mental framework where only their logic is valid. This creates a narrow emotional range in their interactions. Expressions of vulnerability, sadness, or joy may be met with awkwardness or judgment. They may even offer a clinical analysis of your emotional experience, rather than empathy. Over time, their presence creates a psychological atmosphere of subtle oppression. You begin to second, guess your instincts, your opinions, and even your worth. Professionally, these individuals often rise to roles where knowledge is power, academia, law, science, or consultancy. While their competence is undeniable, their interpersonal impact is often divisive. They do not collaborate easily. They may belittle colleagues, dismiss ideas, or take over conversations. Their need to be right often outweighs the need for progress. Ironically, for all their intellect, the intellectual narcissist is deeply insecure. Their superiority is not rooted in genuine self-confidence, but in the fear of being seen as ordinary. They depend on others to reflect back their brilliance. And when that reflection falters, they react with arrogance or withdrawal. So how do you deal with an intellectual narcissist? First, recognize that intelligence and wisdom are not the same. A person can be brilliant and still be profoundly immature. Second, trust your own mind. If a conversation leaves you feeling confused and small, that may not be a reflection of your lack of knowledge, but of their intent to dominate. Lastly, set boundaries in communication. You are not required to engage in debates designed only to elevate someone else's ego. True intelligence, after all, is not about proving superiority. It's about fostering understanding, compassion, and growth. The intellectual narcissist may know a lot, but wisdom begins where arrogance ends. At first glance, the hero narcissist seems admirable, even inspiring. They are the helper, the rescuer, the one who always steps in when others falter. They offer solutions, provide resources, and often seem to carry entire groups, families, or workplaces on their back. But beneath that seemingly selfless exterior lies a far more complex and ego-driven motivation. They are not serving others out of compassion. They are serving their own identity. They must be the hero, and they will orchestrate reality to maintain that illusion at any cost. This type of narcissist thrives on being seen as indispensable. Their entire self-worth is wrapped around the idea that others need them. They find deep psychological satisfaction in being the savior, the one who makes the impossible happen, the one who sacrifices so much for the sake of others. And while this may sound noble, it creates a subtle but toxic dynamic. Everyone else is positioned as helpless, dependent, or incompetent. The hero narcissist doesn't just want to help. They want you to depend on their help. They want your loyalty, your admiration, and your submission in return for their generosity. Their acts of kindness are rarely unconditional. There is always a cost, and that cost is your autonomy. If you begin to grow, to solve your own problems, to need them less, they feel threatened. They may respond by undermining your progress, or subtly making you feel guilty for outgrowing their support. This narcissist is also deeply invested in public perception. They want others to see them as the martyr, the backbone, the savior. They often speak about how much they've done, how hard they've worked, and how little they've been appreciated. Their complaints are dressed in humility. I don't do it for recognition, but they are laced with resentment. They use service as a currency for praise, and if the praise is insufficient, they become bitter, withdrawn, or passive-aggressive. What's especially insidious about the hero narcissist is that their control comes wrapped in good intentions. It's hard to confront someone who's just trying to help. It's hard to call out manipulation when it comes in the form of rescue. But make no mistake, their helpfulness is strategic. It places them at the center of every situation. It allows them to define the rules of engagement, and it grants them moral high ground from which they can subtly judge, direct, or dismiss others. In relationships, this narcissist often attracts people who are genuinely struggling, but instead of empowering them, they create dependency. They don't teach people how to walk, they carry them. And when those same individuals begin to find their footing, the hero narcissist subtly withdraws support or reminds them of how much they owe. Gratitude becomes a leash. In families or teams, they may create an atmosphere where they are the glue holding everything together. Everyone is conditioned to believe that without them, things would fall apart. This belief isn't based on reality, it's based on the narrative they've crafted. It serves their need to feel important and irreplaceable. The hero narcissist may not be overtly cruel, they may not lash out or humiliate, but they erode the confidence and agency of others by making help into a hierarchy, and that is a form of control as potent as any other. So what can be done? The first step is to examine the pattern. Does their help come with invisible strings? Do you feel smaller after being saved? Do they make you feel guilty for needing space or independence? If so, it's time to reframe the relationship. True helpers want others to grow, even if it means becoming unnecessary. The real hero empowers others, not to secure admiration, but to make themselves irrelevant. That's the paradox the hero narcissist cannot face. Their identity is built on being needed, and until they learn to step back, their service will always be a form of self-service in disguise. Of all narcissistic types, the spiritual narcissist is perhaps the most paradoxical. This is the individual who presents themselves as awakened, enlightened, or morally elevated, but whose spiritual posture conceals a deep hunger for control, admiration, and superiority. They have not transcended the ego, they've refined it. They have not abandoned pride, they've simply wrapped it in sacred language. This type of narcissist operates under the illusion that they have reached a higher state of being, whether through religion, meditation, healing practices, or philosophical inquiry. But rather than using their insight to connect, guide, or uplift others, they use it to establish hierarchy, to place themselves above. And that's the essential point. Their spirituality is not a path to humility. It's a vehicle for dominance. They are the ones who claim to see through others. They will tell you they can sense your energy, read your aura, or feel your misalignment. On the surface, this can sound profound. But in practice, it often becomes a way to dismiss disagreement, invalidate emotions, or avoid responsibility. If you challenge them, you're not evolved enough to understand. If you question them, you're projecting. They do not argue with facts, they dismiss with dogma. In relationships, the spiritual narcissist often holds the role of guru or guide. They take pride in helping others awaken, but only if those people accept their framework without resistance. They may be generous with advice, but intolerant of genuine feedback. Their patience is conditional. They tolerate you as long as you play the role of the disciple. But the moment you assert your own insights or challenge their claims, you are labeled toxic, unconscious, or spiritually blind. This type can be especially confusing and damaging in emotional relationships. Because their language appears loving and wise, their manipulation is harder to detect. They may preach forgiveness while holding grudges. They may speak of compassion while shaming others for being low vibration. Their contradictions are hidden behind a veil of purity. They don't raise their voice, they raise their frequency, but the outcome is the same. Others feel diminished, judged, or subtly coerced into submission. One of the most dangerous aspects of the spiritual narcissist is their rejection of accountability. They believe they've transcended the need for it. If they hurt you, it's because you attracted it. If they dominate, it's because you needed the lesson. Their world view is circular and self-justifying. They become untouchable, not because they are truly beyond reproach, but because they've positioned themselves outside of ordinary moral discourse. In community settings, such as spiritual retreats, religious organizations, or wellness spaces, this narcissist often rises to positions of influence. They may be admired, even revered, and their charisma isn't necessarily loud. It's calm, centered, and articulate. But underneath, they can be emotionally detached, grandiose, and authoritarian. They often create dependency by implying that others cannot access truth without their guidance. What's worse is that those around them may feel unable to speak out. After all, how do you criticize someone who radiates love or channels truth? How do you question a person who claims divine insight or moral superiority? This protective aura keeps them insulated from confrontation and allows them to cause deep psychological harm while maintaining the appearance of benevolence. So how can one recognize and respond to the spiritual narcissist? The key is to look beyond the language. Do they make space for your autonomy, or do they subtly erode it? Do they invite your thoughts or invalidate them with mysticism? Do they express love as service or as a tool for superiority? True spirituality is marked by humility, compassion, and openness to being wrong. The moment someone uses spiritual language to shame, silence, or dominate, they've left the path of growth and entered the territory of ego in disguise. The spiritual narcissist may wear robes instead of armor and speak softly instead of shouting, but their goal is the same as any other narcissist: control, and that makes them just as dangerous, if not more so, because their illusion is dressed in virtue.